There we go. I always like to like test live the first few minutes and, you know, let people join and everything. But how is everything going?
Things are going well. It's been busy. I sat down this morning and I drew like this schematic of like all the things I'm working on right now just to get a sense of them. But it's good. It's
That's
good
a
to
good
be involved
idea.
in a lot of stuff that's meaningful. So it's cool. How are things going for you with your business and such?
Good. And this is kind of an update for anybody watching too. So most people know I announced at the early in July 1st that we bought a trolley. So I don't know if you've seen, I feel like you might, I don't know why, I feel like you would totally get along with Deborah, but she owns the Story House, which is a trolley, and it was based out of Rockville. And she decided that she wanted to retire that part of her business. So we purchased it, and I thought we were going to have it pretty easily, but it needed a lot of work. So it's still at the shop getting work done, but hopefully we will have that and we will be able to do a lot more mobile events. Because during the pandemic, as you know, like it was, we were doing whatever we could. And we did a lot of business being mobile and delivering books and things like that for people because they wanted the books to their house. They wanted us to come to them. And it was great because I could just do porch drop off kind of thing. And I was still able to be with a lot of people without having to be with them.
Hey, right.
So
Very cool. That's awesome. So, okay, so you've got the trolley, you've got a virtual, I mean, like online business, and is the brick and mortar store still?
no, we closed the brick and mortar.
Okay,
We actually moved to the Eastern Shore. I have not caught you. Yeah, we're over by Assateague now.
okay,
So
cool.
we are sorry, I have something in my eye. I'm trying to like get rid of it. So we moved to the Eastern Shore so that we can kind of serve this area over here because there was not a bookstore. And we know there's lots of bookstores in the Baltimore area. And I still do work with Harford County and things like that to bring them stuff. But I am definitely just I'm gonna pop over to the comments because I realize there's some people hopping on. So if you have any comments or questions for Ed, you can go ahead and leave them in the box. We're just waiting for a few more people to hop on. So yeah, I don't have the brick and mortar anymore because I was just sitting there and I appreciate people coming to me, but I thought it would be more beneficial if I could be at things like farmers markets and like they're already going to those places. So I'll just go there and then save them a trip kind of thing. So that's the idea with the trolley is that I'll be able to do pop-ups and things like that. So for Independent Bookstore Day, in UK, did you come to the one? I think you came. Did you come with Piper in August?
Yes.
Okay, because they moved it, and I was like, I'm losing track of days. So yes, in August, and then they redid it again this year in April because it's normally the last weekend in April, and of course last year they just moved it to August. So I was back in Bel Air and I did a pop up in Vagabond, so at the sandwich company. So
okay. Wow, that is awesome.
Just trying to travel, you know.
That's cool. It's so cool that you're conscious of places that don't have. I mean, that's a big bias for me. I didn't realize from my experience growing up and my life experience, when I've come to communities that didn't have bookstores, didn't have libraries, it was like, well, how did this happen? I was in Socorro, New Mexico for counterterrorism training, and just the first day I was just kind of walking around, and I walked into a dollar store. I'm talking to some people. I said, "Where's the bookstores around here?" And they just kind of went, "What?"
Book deserts.
Yeah, exactly. And almost over 20 years ago, when I first came to Baltimore, when I first got out of college, I went to Mondawmin Mall. Elaine was doing a conference at one of the local schools. So I said, okay, I'll just go hang out till she's done. I went to Mondawmin Mall and I walked back and forth. It's like, something's weird about this mall. Something's weird. I asked someone, where's the bookstore? Where's the bookstore chain? And they just kind of looked at me like, well, there's a store downstairs that sells a couple books, but it was so alien to them and to the people there. And I thought, wow, what a disservice.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm grateful that Baltimore at least has now there's a lot more bookstores growing. There's so many bookstores coming to Baltimore. But at least they did have a good public library system.
I'm so into the Pratt this year. It's been awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
So, welcome to everybody joining us. For those of you who don't know, I am Liz from Capra Coast Books, and I am joined today by Edward Doyle-Gillespie, and he is an amazing poet. And he was like super prepared this morning. I was like, I have questions for you, and he's like, well, I've got this, I've got something to say, as you do, and I love it always. So I'm just going to go ahead and let you take it away. First I should say that I'll let you introduce yourself because you'll do it better than I will.
Oh no. I'm Ed Doyle-Gillespie. I am a 16-year veteran of the Baltimore City Police Department. That's my second career. I was a teacher. Before that, I taught history and literature. I went to Hopkins. I went to George Washington. I've lived in Baltimore for about 22 years. And I've always written, and I feel lucky that I've been able to kind of, writing has come along with me as I've gone through my different evolutions. And so it's come together with my work in law enforcement. So I've produced some books, written some books, and some of it has to do directly with policing and with other themes. But poetry has been the most accessible thing for me, I think, right now, with my work and my lifestyle.
And you have your fifth book just came out, right? Is this
right.
fifth? Okay,
right.
Fifth. I am counting correctly. Fifth book, and this was born out of essentially the pandemic. But all of your themes, I was looking at a lot of the summaries. We do have them on our website, www.capracoastbooks.com. We do have them there, but they all deal with the human condition, and it's just interesting to see how your poetry has evolved and the themes that you're changing on, you're growing on. So
interesting.
It's it's funny because I was just thinking about it, and I didn't realize you said you lived in Baltimore for 22 years, and I just realized we've known each other for almost 10 years. Yeah. And the time has gone by. This whole last year really added a whole different dimension to it too.
Didn't it? Yeah, it really did. And so all those things, I mean, everything you just talked about, there was a crucible for everything this past year. It's like, so what do you make of the human condition? What do you make of Baltimore? What do you make of relationships? Whether you add this element and take this element out. And I mean, it's interesting for me because I didn't quarantine. I couldn't quarantine. I was considered essential. So this started off for me going in and fitting people for gas masks. That's one of the things that I do. And I did some writing during that ultimately came together with this book. And so this has been, I mean, a horrific, it's not been like, hey, wow, this is awesome. But I mean, it's definitely been a forge.
That's such a good comparison, because how do you think of something that is so terrible, but also there a lot in ways that we all, so many people found new ways to work. We've evolved. A lot of people are working from home and things like that. So I'm just curious to hear more about the book.
Sure. So before the pandemic, over 7 days, I wrote 7 poems at a writer's retreat, and kind of tucked those away. And then during the pandemic, I just found myself writing nonstop. Even while, I had breaks during work, when I was at home, I had my notebook with me, constantly writing and just kind of letting it seek its own level. And so themes of alienation came out, because don't forget, this was also overlapping the huge social crucible that he was based around George Floyd. And I found myself on the street. This is after having gone through the unrest of 2015. I'm a veteran of that. And so we were getting geared up. It was very triggering for lots of us, but it was also a great point of reckoning of people are saying something and you really need to listen. You as a law enforcement officer really need to listen. We as people really need to listen. So I'm gearing up for that. I'm putting myself in a headspace for that. I'm putting myself in a headspace for, the family is quarantining at home while I'm out every day, and then coming back to that dynamic, so I say, well, where do I fit into this dynamic since, you've got the family hermetically sealed in the house while you're out dealing with dealing with people calling us on who we are as law enforcement officers and asking these incredibly intrinsic questions about, like, what is America, and how do we function, and what is justice. I mean, there was just so much on the table. So that really came through. I just kind of let myself write. I just kind of let it flow. And as far as poetry, I mean, and I think that's a good example. As far as poetry and its the use of law enforcement, like, as a cop, why am I writing poetry? One thing, on a very basic level, it was cathartic. It's like there's just a lot of stuff that has to come out. And what I thought was funny was we're used to writing, cops writing about police work. And you've got your gritty crime dramas and your noir and stuff like The Wire and Homicide and The Corner. Okay, so you've got that, and that tends to be, you've got police procedurals and things. But why did I think that poetry, especially looking at this past year, really said so much? And I'm writing a science fiction novel, and I looked up the word viscera the other day, in regards to a rather gruesome sequence I'm writing. But I looked up the word viscera, and so, no pun intended, it really got to the heart of what I was trying to say. Like, looking at viscera, the internal organs and the main cavity of the body, and then that took me, of course, to visceral, right? To visceral, and the idea that is relating to emotion, relating to something beyond intellect, impulse and feeling, and that, arising from impulse, arising from sudden emotion. Okay, so as I looked at that, I said, that's why I think poetry spoke to what I was trying to say. I think the immediacy of the language, the economy of language, the brevity of language said a lot, at least from my perspective. So at first, like I said, it was just cathartic. It was like, I've got these things I have to get out, these images I have to get out, and the brevity and the economy of language spoke to. And that's, that gave me insight. Then I had to say, well, what type of poetry? So, like, that first, like you said, thematically things have kind of changed. Like, what type of poetry would work for it? And there was no way that a closed system of poetry, at least for me, was going to work, because chaos was such a part. It's like chaos was such a part of what I did. It was such a part of what I do in law enforcement, that it needed something open-ended and needed something free-form. And so I think that free verse really opened a door there. Now, what I find interesting, so I'm writing in free verse, and I think epic didn't work. I mean, I was writing about, I guess you could say, cops are big storytellers, and they always want to talk about their heroic deeds and their, and so it's like a folk culture. It's a folk culture, and there's folk storytelling in it. But the epic form didn't really work for that. It had to be, at least for me, more, closed, more open, and more direct. And so, given that, I think if you took a lot of my poems, my early poems, and you took out the enjambment, right, and just kind of laid it end to end, it would almost read like a story in many cases. As much as I wanted to get away from, I mean, didn't want to do a prose poem. I didn't want to do a narrative. I started some stories, but so I can see there's there's that weird kind of dynamic. It's like, as much as I was seeking the economy of that language and I was seeking brevity, I was writing in a way that still, if you took the enjambment out and you just laid it out, it's a type of a short story. I mean, let me give you an example.
Sure.
This is a poem about homicide that I actually got there at the tail end. I mean, I saw the guy die in the street, and this is from my book Masala Tea and Oranges. This is called Final Hajj.
I have the one here with the sword.
Yes.
It's sorry, I don't have just that cover. I only have the two together. These are the first two books, so it's the one here with the sword.
Right. I have that other one there as well. So
There you go.
this is called Final Hajj, and just I kind of looked at how this is formed as I went back to it. When the call to prayer goes out from the mosque on Islamic Way, I'm helping to load Tavon Fitzgerald into the back of Medic 4. He has only a small hole from the girl's kitchen knife over his heart, but his body will erupt with a raspberry tide when the residents down at Maryland General crack his chest to practice the alchemy of resurrection. They will fail, unable to make the quick out of the dead, and I will gather his clothes, baggy layers of ghetto soldier uniform heavy with blood, and document them on a police form 56. I will wrap the chain of his zodiac medallion around his butane lighter and stuff them into the smallest of the evidence envelopes. I will shake the clots loose from his ragged sweatshirt as I give it to the next red plastic bag in the pile. I will change my gloves 3 times and wonder whether he was distracted at that last moment when the loudspeaker reminded him that God is great. So that was my first year out, and I actually watched this guy die. He looked me in the eye and took his last breath. And I followed the medic and did all of that. And so when I look at that, I see, okay, I just had a story I needed to tell. And so there are certain forms. I mean, every poem is a story you need to tell, but the question is, what type of language do you need to use? What type of sounds do I have to use? And I started to ask myself that as I looked at some of my work. It's funny because I had to kind of take this third person persona and go back to my work and say, okay, what was this person trying to say? Barbara Kingsolver said, every writer you've been has a right to exist. And she said she went back to Animal Dreams and she looked at it and said, who wrote this? But she so it's interesting you brought up, you see changes in the work that I've done over time. So I found myself asking, like, if I dig a bit deeper, what sounds, I mean, why did I choose certain language within that poetic form? Okay. And for me, and once again, this is kind of like killing the author, looking at yourself and still killing the author. It's like, I noticed that at a certain point, I thought that the plosive sounds were important in understanding the ethic of what I was trying to say in terms of experiences in Baltimore, those visceral experiences. I noticed that in some cases, the best thing was most useful thing was that Germanic sound, and sound, that there was something hard or harsh that needed to be conveyed, right? So I needed to be able to do that with a sound that spoke to it. All of which, at times I did very subconsciously, I'm sure. But let me take a look at this one here. It's called First on the Scene. This is not long into my career. First on the scene. It is late in the shift and I'm breathing you in. It has been 6 months since anyone has seen you, smelled your oxtails and rice, heard the muttered oaths as you pace the 3rd floor hall in rubber flip-flops. It has taken 6 months, from what we can tell, for you to become a dark stain in your thin, bare mattress, a pair of empty eye sockets, a scent of cloud. I am standing in your place because after 6 months, you have seeped below the door, filled the air of this tenement flat, and now, after 6 months, you are a skeleton, a tent of skin, a jagged knife, a stolen check, and I am breathing you in. Now, when I look at that, the technique, the repetition, I think was important because on a crime scene, at least for me, I can't speak for other experiences, that you find yourself in a continuous loop. It's like I'm so immersed in what's going on here. So constantly having the repetition and then almost like staking it to the ground, the 6 months, six, that, you know, that plosive that pins down that word, I think constantly keeps pinning you back to that scene and creates a place and time with that very hard consonants, right? And then that place and time is something, it's something very real, it's very rigid. Then when you get to this person herself, like when you get to what has happened, I look at how it says 6 months skeleton in the next line. So it's a sibilance of the S sound and the harshness of the X and the K kind of it kind of smooth, takes you like on a slope from one mindset to the other, from one ethos to the other, right? And so I had to look back and say, did I think that it authentically portrayed how I felt? Because you're nailed to this place. That's one of the things that I thought was important to note. People often look at police officers and say, wow, what a weirdo, what a horrible person this guy is, the way he thinks and talks and things he talks about. But those officers are often still nailed to that place. They carry a lot of trauma. Police officers carry a tremendous amount of trauma, and they're still, just like a soldier of war, that's like, they're still back there. They're still there all the time. And so constantly taking that X of the 6 and nailing you into that place time and time again to show that you have incorporated it, I thought was useful. So another useful thing about poetry in terms of being able to portray almost like when writers have talked about stream of consciousness, like, what's going on in the writer's head.
It's so interesting to hear you portray your experiences, but also nail them to the page in a way. Talk about not just the language, but just having them in a book and having them out. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's so the question is always, what do I do with this? All right, and I mean, I talked with I train police officers, I train other officers, and I constantly say, what do you do with the trauma? Do you try to drink it away? Do you settle it? You just keep packing it and packing it and packing it? And I think being able to talk about it, at least for me, this has worked for me. Being able to say, let me not only write about it, but really make a demand of myself that I put it out there. And I realized, writing that the sounds mean a lot to me, that the consonants, because there are those moments that's how a lot of it feels to me, is the sharpness of the consonants, So when the sibilance comes along, it's usually rooted around something sharp, something destructive, like a knife edge or a bullet, So I guess you said things have kind of branched off for me over time, and I've had I do write a lot about folklore and mythology. I really am fascinated by it, and so in this, I wrote about. I realized as I look back to it, as much as I wrote about things like social justice, and I wrote about crime, and I wrote about folklore, and I wrote about folklore in terms of all of those things too, because often that's how we deal with issues of social justice, of who your family is, what your space is. I wrote about the home in this a lot, where lots of us have spent a lot of time, and so we created there's a family folklore based in homes, right? Based in spaces. I mean, I'm looking at this house thinking, someday we're going to say, wow, this is where we quarantined, or part of the family quarantine, this is where so much happened. This is a poem called Excluding the Coldness of My Room and the Strange Ways of Fathers. When I write this, I will say that the house was narrow and that it overflowed with books whose backs were well broken by the hands of old men. I will say that he spoke to me in so many languages that my teachers feared for the sanity of my tongue. In my story, you bickered with him using the immigrant mouths of my grandparents because the things of which you spoke were only the business of adults. I will write that you took me into the cauldron of your kitchen along with my sister and the aunties of your coven. Garlic would cleanse, I would say. I will say, you said, and red wine forgive if you forget to find it in the coolest recesses of the house. I will write that you were working with the crank of an ancient grinder or even a mortar and pestle when you explained to me that paprika could be almost tasteless if done the wrong way. If you did not crush the right pepper in the right way, it would give you its color, maybe a trail of its scent. But when you went to meet it, its flavor would only be a ghost haunting whatever was meant to bring you sustenance. Um, I realize I have a lot. I'm now at this point in my life. Maybe maybe you've gone through this thing. A lot of people have. You kind of have a different perspective on your family and the home in which you were raised, and you kind of have these moments of revelation, and you have these moments of saying, okay, who have I decided you were versus what you were? What have I decided I'm just going to stow away, and what am I going to bring forward? So basically, how am I going to write this story when I look at my life, my particularly my childhood, the place that launched me? How am I going to write that story? Um, and so the speaker here, at the end of the day, I mean, I realized I was like, well, I'm really enjoying painting this picture of this family. It's so cool. But then thinking, but this is probably a farce, right? And what was the speaker's family really? And I think I know I've been wrestling with that a fair amount with my family, with my family that my family, a Philadelphia family, launched me, and once again, the painting of the I like the way you can use language in poetry to paint those very essential pieces of a person's personality. You know, um, to forgive and forget. I have one line after the other that I did quite unconsciously. Isn't
That's the best way.
that awesome? It's just you can see where the idea of like the muse got into someone's head. Like, how did I do that? But the idea of forgive and forget, and how do we do that? I mean, there's been a lot of honesty amongst people, I think, trapped in a house together for some time.
Yes.
So I thoroughly enjoyed writing that one. Another that's allowed me to venture out. So I found out, once again, a question about family. Not long ago, I was writing out a health questionnaire, something, and I was talking to my mother, and it said race, and I put Black, African American, and it said ethnicity, and I was explaining this to her, and she said, "You better put Latino," and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, our family's actually from Cuba, so." Wait a minute, what? So then it started thinking, so wait a minute, who came? Well, my grandfather came. Well, his real name was Suarez. Did he speak with an accent? Did he speak Spanish? I only heard him speak Spanish after your uncle died. Well, wait a minute. So how much of our family culture was a contrivance? We had an immigrant experience that was, I mean, there were no Jorges. There were only Georges in my family. Manuel became just M, period. So wait a minute. How much of this is real? So I I found myself writing this during my stay down in Florida. I stayed in Florida to October before last when I wrote this. Creation myth in one day. There are Cuban men in the lobby now. They have come in the height of the heat of the day, in dark designer suits and open collars. They have come to play chess, teaching leaps and slanted lines to young girlfriends, talking to the Haitian woman who brews the coffee, coolly racing from the cigar shop around the corner to the library chill of this marbled museum. And when the sun is swallowed up, new ones rise out of the Atlantic, out of the beach's raked sand. They wear the white pants of cane cutters, deliberately out at the knee, embracing conga drums with sinewy legs as they sit beside the lobby door. As I ply the Haitian woman for another cup, they thrum the taut hides of their drums and they wail their words because the songs are ancient loves, circles drawn in sand, and an ocean full of dancing bones. So, just like with my work with police work, I think poetry, the directness, the brutal beauty of some of the language you can use when you're economizing, when you're forced to economize language, can help. It's helped me dig into my questions about my family mythology, which at 51 now is suddenly becoming a very present issue for me, which kind of blindsided me. So I think that the economy of it's a tool that lets me say, this has meant this, and now you're telling me it's not this. What is this? Hope that made some sense.
No, definitely, absolutely, definitely. I agree. I feel
You're coming in a little garbled again.
Oh, sorry. Let me see if I can fix this again. I don't know. Hopefully it'll be okay. Can you hear me now?
No.
Let me see. If I can take this off. Does that work okay?
Let's see. Say again.
Is that any better?
Oh, you're still coming in.
How's that?
Better?
Okay.
Yes.
I just won't touch anything. Laura says here, I'll show it here. Difficult concepts sometimes, hot to forgive and how to, I'm assuming she means how to forgive and forget, or how to use life experience for good.
Right. And I think that thing about using it for good, we like to always think, well, I'm gonna take this thing that happened to me and I'm gonna use it for good. And I try to do that, like with my teaching. I try to say to my recruits, well, here's a way I wasn't the best officer. Here's how I dehumanized someone or did something wrong. And I don't want you to be like that. When the thing's been done to you, often it's hard to get to that because you're first like, wait, I want you to acknowledge what you did. First, I need you to be able to, before I can turn this into something else. And so yeah, it is hard. And once again, that lack of forgiveness is often part of the family culture, right? That's often a thing. We don't talk about that, but he did that. No, and so that's often a big part of it. Very, very true. Yeah.
I'm reading the book Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, I believe it is. And I'm pretty sure that's where there was a line about how our parents, I think this is where it's from. Our parents want us to be what they wanted to be so that they can live vicariously through us. They're telling us we can be whatever we want. But really what they want us to be is what they wanted to be so that they can do it because they weren't able to, kind of thing. And that's I feel like you touch on that concept and that idea, and just thinking about families and just how much in general my life has also changed. And this growth of talking about ancestry and DNA, and everybody can just take a DNA test and find out where their roots are from and things like that. And so it's very interesting to hear even you discussing your family telling you aren't who you thought you were and who they told you were up to this point. And now all of a sudden you're supposed to be somebody different and have a whole different, like you said, a whole different mythology. Very interesting.
Right. And it's funny because my mom says, it's funny. I mentioned this to a woman to a Boricua woman, and she said, "Oh, she's the Latin family. There's always the secret." I'm like, "Yeah, ours was that we were a Latin family." but yeah, here's another one about family, kind of from the outside. Much later, she will edit this. If you see the typewriter woman come down, It will be to buy our longaniza and the fried cheese that goes with her wine, and our coffee. She said once that she could drink what we brew here, what we press here, because she learned about coffee from her Damascus father. She was tiny, and he gave her sips and spoons as he wrote with his tall script in the margins of second-hand books or scribbled on the edges of beveled pages. You may see her in men's clothes, talking to the cappuccino women that cook here, that carry our kitchen smells and our butane heat home in their skin every night. She came to them on the day that she finally cleaned out her father's apartment. She came with her arms full of an antique underwood, and she begged them to speak to her in unbroken torrents of coffee ground as Spanish and wax paper cooking oil until her mourning time was done and the keys to her new place were properly blessed. Again, that's one that I put together during that residency. And the question of how, it's funny, my little 9-year-old said to me the other night, she said, I feel like time is going by so fast. I'm growing, I'm getting bigger, and time is going by, and I really wish I could, sometimes I wish I could go back and do things over knowing what I know now. Like, you're 9, right? You're not supposed to be talking like this. I mean, it's like this is old man talk here. But
you only have 9 years worth of going back to. Like, wait until it's 50 years worth of going back to, right?
Exactly. And I was like, wow, philosophical little girl. But it was like the idea of constantly saying, well, okay, I can't go back. What can I at least bring with me? Right. What can I at least bring with me? And then there's the question of, well, what story do I want to write? Right? Am I bringing a scar with me? Am I bringing something, a piece of art with me? What am I bringing? I think that's what really, that's one thing that really spoke to me about that, the narrative that was, conjured up in my head there. I also found that I've made a foray. I've always written about supernatural things because I like them and they're cool, but also they're a great way to tell stories about folklore. That's what science fiction and fantasy, and I'll even go, even like religion can say that. I mean, because usually we accept that folklore we often is, the other guy's religion, right? Mine's a religion, but his, mythology, folklore, that's usually the religion of the people that didn't win. But I love magical realism, and I think maybe even reaching for those Latin folk roots is something that speaks to me. So that's why I kind of gravitate to it in many cases. This is called To Be Trussed Up and Waiting. They will slaughter the goat when he comes back from the mountain. They have tethered it to the tree, and they drink rum through the passing time as they wait for him to wind his way back down the dirt road. They smoke the tobacco that he gave to them before he picked up a twisted branch to use as a walking stick and said that he would be back soon. Just a little walk, then I will come back for the meat. So, now that he has met the conquistador who sits forlorn in heavy armor at the foot of a shattered castle, and the slave who still limps from cutting off the cuffs on the day of his escape, he comes down and they gather their knives. He will collect the meat and pay them, he has explained, but he must see the severed head. Times are hard here, and he wants to know that they have not tried to sell him the carcass of a withered dog from the junkyard on the other side of the road. I'm interested in ghosts, and I'm interested in ghosts and why we create stories about ghosts. And so, the things with which we still wrestle. I think once again that's been a big theme this past year. What we want to dig up, what we don't. I talked to a guy who said that Confederate statues were important to him because he felt like he could commune with the ghosts of these I feel like the general's there and I can talk to him. No, okay.
Why?
Ask him why he was a traitor. I mean,
right? Like, why? Oh,
but this is something that has galvanized. I mean, this is like speaking to those ghosts. Speaking to ghosts is something over which people will tear apart the fabric of a society. Right.
and well, it's interesting thinking about back to the story of your 9-year-old, and her. It's such a wise thing for her to say, but it's also her looking at the ghosts of her past in a way, and saying like, and I feel like for a 9-year-old to say that, at that point you just say, okay, well now you need to take what you know now and apply it to the future. You can't go back, so you have to remember to apply. That's what I think I need to teach my 9-year-old. I think we need to get them together again soon.
Yes.
Laura says your emotion definitely shows in your writing. Very moving to hear you read it. Absolutely. Actually, sorry, I'm totally derailing in a way. But I didn't check. I meant to check. Have you thought about doing these as audio releases?
Oh.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that.
I would like that.
I can help you with that. Because I was thinking earlier, poetry, it's one thing to read it, very much so. And then it's almost a whole nother experience to have someone read it out loud or hear it. But then, of course, it's even another level to have the author read it in the intended delivery, so to speak.
Okay.
So that would be something that, I know I always appreciate audiobooks in general, but poetry as audio, I think would be appreciated. So I will have to get to, after this, I'll help you with that.
I would really like that. Yes.
Yeah. And then I had another question, but I can't think of what it was off the top of my head. But if anyone has any questions, you can just leave them in the comments. And I'm sure my other question will come to me. I'll let you continue with what your thoughts were.
I think fatherhood too has made me see things through a different lens. 2016 was a real. I'm still processing the type of trauma and secondary trauma and vicarious trauma that a lot of us experienced from there and for the next 4 years. And being the father of a girl, particularly, I have to say that for me, like I know it's funny. I read this bridge called my back, which was a collection of essays. If you don't know it, it's a collection of essays by women of color. It came out in 1980. It was basically them saying, we've worked with these white women in the feminist movement through the 60s and 70s and found that our directions were just very different because they had access to the patriarchy and we don't. And this is our statement. And I've talked to lots of white women who said that, they got it. That book helped them like say, oh, wow, you had a different experience. And we all, I think we talk too much about white privilege as though we're the only type. Like as a man, I definitely I came to realize I have like a type of male privilege that, like, if you were to say, is there sexism? Yeah, sexism, it's bad. Misogyny, it's bad. But when I sat there and watched the trajectory of what took place, because I thought after the grab her statement, I was like, okay, this is done. Okay, there's no way we're going any farther after that. And then watching, and then how I'm surrounded by women. I knew women, numerous women that were like, oh, it's fine. Like, what are your expectations of the world? And looking at my daughter and thinking, how am I going to prepare her for a world that sees her and, a world that already disdains her, not everyone everywhere, but this is a very strong dynamic that she's going to have to deal. And of course, like, most fathers, I thought, well, I'll do something drastic and violent and that'll fix it, But I thought about this. A lot of images from Greek mythology came back to me, and a lot of images from martial arts mythology and folklore came to me. And I wrote this one in the manner of Hephaestus. First, I decide I must make a macahuera for her. The board should have drifted in from the ocean. It should be stout, maybe a beam torn from the rib cage of a whaling vessel that rolled over in its sleep and died in the sea that surrounds our home. I will haul it up from the beach, cutting my hands, baptizing its grain with a new finish as I pull it into our yard. I will wrap it in the coarsest rope that Chelsea's hardware has to offer. While I make those Ouroboros coils, I will wonder whether she should knit her hair into dreadlocks when the time comes. That would look fierce, framing her face. But then I remind myself that you must never give them anything of yours that they can grab to be used to hoist you from your feet and slam you to the earth. Better that her hair should huddle close to her skull, that sweat should bead on her scalp as she breaks her bones against the macahuera's hide. And if her eyes fill with watery pain, I will remind her that the spider webs that she feels cutting her way through her bones are the meaning of all this. That they cannot break a girl who has already fractured herself against a driftwood macahuera. And Ares was the only father an Amazon could claim. Now,
Wow.
as a woman, can you give me some feedback on?
I love it. It just
Oh, you're coming in
ugh,
like cellophane
I
again.
don't know what the issue is. I'm sorry.
That's it.
Normally I haven't really had too many issues with. Is it okay now?
Getting better, I think. Hang on.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Ah. I don't know what the issue is. Unplugging everything.
Oh, there.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. No, I just in general, overall, all of your writing and the imagery that you provide is just amazing to me, and I can see all of it, and I understand as a child of having a 9-year-old also, and going through all, thinking about, worrying all the things that we're worried about for them, and just I can see it even as a mother, and I know you experience obviously different as a father, but yeah, so I appreciate it.
The concept of the macahuera, it's an Okinawan training technique for Okinawan karate. When you punch something harder than your hand, and cause micro fractures in your own hand, in your knuckles. And the idea is that it heals back. When it heals, the bone is denser. So they do it to their legs, to their hands. So when you get struck by this person, it's almost like being hit by an iron bar. So there's the acceptance of self-destruction to harden.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, I'm a big comic book fan, big superhero fan. I use that in a lot of my teaching. I teach ethics, and I use superheroes a lot in my ethics teaching. This is called The Adventures of Patience and Fortitude. By the end of the story, the Boricua girl could fly. She could actually fly. It wasn't just a controlled fall like in the first chapter when she surprised the creeping man behind her tenement. And it wasn't merely attaching herself to the wind, like when she floated away and landed on the steps of the Fifth Avenue Library in the middle of the night. By the end of the story, she could crouch on the ledge of her window, stretch her body away from the endless noise of her family's apartment, and just fly. Now she could go on adventures with the Khmer girl who lived 2 floors down. She was the one who could turn herself to stone. Sometimes she would just do a foot or a fist, like when she used Bakator boxing to fight the corner boys and the thieves who came to raid her family's store just before closing. When she needed to, she could make herself into a sarzin, smooth and the color of egg yolk. She saved this for the boys when they made a ring around her, wrapped their fists with belts and stolen chains of bicycles. By the end of the story, the Boricua girl could fly down 2 flights, take the Khmer boxer by the wrist, and soar the two of them off to find danger. They would be good partners, she thought. They both knew the city well, so there would be few places for villains to hide. And this girl, who could make herself into concrete, would keep our heroine from flying too close to the sun.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
I just, again, the imagery, you can see it, and it's a comic book come to life. But also of course, as poetry does, the extra layer of is. By the way, is my sound better now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I was like, let me try to set this up.
Mhm.
So the 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 extra depth is the best way I know how to describe it. You're so much more eloquent than I. Yes, just the extra layer there. So you talk about the graphic novel and the idea of the comics and all that, and just knowing that mythology and the mythology where that comes from and the extra layer. So I like that kind of callback, talking about flying too close to the sun, and that aspect.
And I realized too. Thank you. I realized too. Also, looking at women, looking at girls, have known and saying, what are the survival techniques that women often have to use? And I realized as I wrote it, once again, it's like, ooh, I didn't know that. It's like, do I make myself into stone, or do I learn to fly, or do I learn to turn myself to stone? It seems like are two of the big survival techniques for lots of women in misogynistic situations. Do I remove myself, or do I just say I know how to absorb this? And when do girls have to start learning that? You know, and I think this is me working out a lot of my angst about fatherhood. About how to teach teach her that. And of course, it's the angst and the frustration can come out and just I want her to just be able to lay someone out. It's like, okay, she can't solve all of her problems like that.
Yes.
you know, and Baltimore continues to be an important player in my writing. And even though as a cop, you get access to a lot of places and you end up in a lot of really interesting tableaus, like you find yourself in, wow, this is a really strange scene. I wouldn't be here if I weren't in law enforcement. And we all know the block in Baltimore. And it's very interesting when you spend some time there, if you, walk foot there for a while and you talk to some of the people down there. I remember having a conversation with a woman about literature for quite some time, standing there, and she's standing there in her dancer's costume, and it turns out she had a bachelor's in literature, and we talked for a long time, and we talked about body art and tattoos, and I was saying I wanted to get a collection of books, and this girl said, well, here's a way you could do it, and she was like, it could be a whole library, it could look like this. I was like, wow, it's amazing you thought of that. I think I might like to do that. She goes, yeah, the things you learn from strippers, right? So this is called Vixen in the Alley on New Year's Eve. To show me what she means, what I must understand, she rises up on one foot, stretches one thigh open and away from its mate, stands ecce homo in platform heels. She tells me again that she has named herself Vixen, and that she is the only white girl at the Diamond Club who has no Baltimore stigmata on the hollows of her arms, who does not have sleep shuddering the purple lids of her eyes. She is thick and she is healthy, she tells me again. She should be the one to dance for me, because tonight is the first of the year, and she can tell that I have chosen the wrong words for too many times. I have accepted far too much smoke that has only strangled me. I have left far too much shredded green glass in my wake. But none of this matters to Vixen in her platform shoes. She will forgive me my trespasses, she says, because this is the first of the year, The horseback cops are traversing in front of Eddie's like a fascist promenade, and she is the one meant to usher me inside. It was based on a Baltimore character that I met several years ago. It's kind of on my way back from lunch, and she said, "Hey, how you doing?" and just started spilling her life to me. But
I bet you meet a lot of very interesting characters.
I do, really do. And what's most interesting is they often turn out to not be who you think they are.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that's most fascinating about them. You know, the person that you, and this is one of the things that I teach. I teach about bias, and I say you really have to dig. Sometimes those snap judgments can be useful in some cases, and often they're not. And you really don't understand to whom you're speaking and what they could mean to you. And ultimately, we make those snap judgments about ourselves as well. Going back to the idea of the family mythology.
Absolutely. That's what I was just thinking too, is the transition of all of this and how when we started talking, and how often our snap judgments about other people, but also the snap judgments about ourselves.
Yes, right.
We think one thing, oh, immediately I'm angry, so I have to act a certain way. And just like you mentioned, you have that snap reaction as a father of, oh, I want to get aggressive. But at least I think at least I'd like to hope, as a society, we're growing and understanding that mental health is a concern and we need to stop. And we're all taking this big step back, or most of us, taking this big step back and saying, wait, is that how we have to react? Is that what we have to do?
Right.
And saying no.
And I think it's important to note, he said, a lot of us are taking that step. A lot of us are saying, is this how we should deal with this? And we are becoming so bifurcated because, again, our folklore means so much to us. I mean, I can tell you, you can say, okay, well, this person's a drug addict. All right. Well, this person has a mental health issue. And what can we do to deal with this person? That person is a criminal and a junkie, and that person needs to be punished. And I've often seen situations where I've said, well, do you agree that I can show you that the physiology of this person's brain has become warped? And it's a physiological thing that we can change. Yes, but then someone has to let go of this person being the other and the villain. And if they let go of that, then they have to change something about themselves too. More than once, I've heard someone say, so I talked to one guy who said he was very staunch in his right-wing views and very, and he got injured and he had to take opiates. And he said he was sitting in his office and kind of zoning in and out. And he said, I really see now how difficult it must be for people that are addicted. I'm still conservative. I'm still conservative. I still think that you have to take me to, it was like, it was really important to him that you understand he wasn't turning into a snowflake, but he did have some empathy now for people, that have an addiction. And you can see there was a wrestling match going on because I don't want to lose my credentials here, right? I've heard two people have said that. It was very important to them to qualify. I'm still right wing. I'm still, because they didn't, the last thing we want to give up is our folklore, right? That's what a lot of the talk about the, I don't like the term critical race theory. I think it's called history, but I mean, a big part of it is people don't want to give up their folklore. They don't want to give up their mythology,
Just like you said, even with the statues, coming down to statues of Confederate soldiers. Like, we can't get, they struggle giving that up because that is losing part of their mythology and past. So yeah, it is 11 o'clock. We've been chatting for an hour, so I don't want to take up your whole morning. But everyone has, we've got quite a few nice comments here from Laura. So I will thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Again, this is Edward Doyle-Gillespie, an amazing poet. His books are on our website, www.cabracoastbooks.com. And if there's anything that you don't see there, let me know and I will make sure I get it for you. And we will definitely have to have you on again soon.
I'd like that very much.
Yeah, and hopefully we can start doing some more in-person things when I get a little more on the road.
Awesome. That's
Thank you so much for joining me
Thank you.
again, and have a wonderful day, and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.